Hello everybody, this is Janpha Thadphoothon, and this morning uh, I would like to introduce you to one of the concepts in oral interaction or discourse in general, and that concept is interpretive framework. Let me repeat: interpretive framework, or a framework or a context for us to interpret each other intention. Okay, and let me give you a little bit of background of the idea. It's all about our background knowledge. Okay, in order to understand each other, we need to have what we call, technically we call that schemas or schemata, or the background knowledge. We use them to understand each other, to make sense of the world. For example, uh, when I say, you're very greedy. You eat like a shoe shop. You eat like shoe shop. You need some cultural background to understand it. Okay. So the thing is that context actually controls the meaning. Like open wide, do it again. Let's talk. I mean the meanings depends on the context. It's not actually in the words per se. Uh, this is about the language use, actually, the pragmatic meanings. So, what is an interpretive framework? Is actually a frame or a structure, okay, a context, if I may put it, to help us actually understand each other, because they are actually, as I just mentioned, um, the meanings depends on the context, the setting, the intention, and many other factors. So, in order to understand each other, we have to correctly interpret what other people say in the context. Uh, We have to interpret the size and in relation to the context that we are in. And of course, many times we misunderstand each other. So, because the thing is that we bring a set of expectations about the overall activity, uh, and for example, and we call this the primary frame. For example, in a lecture, in a typical lecture, we form a mental construction of what a typical lecture would be like, actually. And within the primary frame, we actually interact with one another, and this is what we are doing through the thing called interactive frames. Remember, a talk or a conversation is interactive. We are not talking alone. We interact with the audience. And now I'll give you an example of what I just talked about, the primary framework or the primary frame, like a lecture. Within the primary frame, there are actually interactive frames. Like within a lecture, there are actually moments when me, for example, as a lecturer, have to do a bit of preaching. You should do that. You should not eat in the classroom. You should behave yourself, for example. And occasionally, I would explain the concept. I would explain, I would challenge within a framework. I maybe tell you some jokes, like funny stories, like things like that. Also, tasting, checking on, revising, and these are typical interactive moments, I would say, section of frames within the primary frame called lecture. So a typical lecture would incorporate these frames within it. So a lecture has several interactive frames. Another example is when you undergo a medical examination. A medical doctor will ask you some questions. We have the inquiring moment, the joking moment. Maybe a medical doctor will actually joke around, to ease the tension, and maybe to prescribe something, give you some advice, tell you not to eat too much, to do a bit of exercise, and things like that. So this is what a typical medical examination would entail. So just wrap up. It context is very important in anything, in anything, in successful communication, and we need to take into consideration that in order to make sense of each others, we need to interpret the frame. So interpretive framework is very important for us to understand each other. And I talk about two frames: the primary frame and the interactive frames. Thank you very much.